We told you the Strait opening was not real. The ships turned back on the same day it was declared open. We told you the ceasefire was fragile. The IRGC fired on tankers within hours of it taking effect. We told you the 10-day clock was the most dangerous variable. Iran rejected the second round of talks and called American demands childish. We told you Iran would use the pause to rearm. The IRGC commander confirmed publicly on video that his forces restocked missiles and drones faster than before the war began. We told you China was not neutral. The Defense Intelligence Agency formally assessed Beijing was weighing X-band radar transfers to Tehran. We told you Netanyahu was publicly celebrated and privately trapped. Axios confirmed he found out about the prohibition post from the media and was personally stunned. We told you the USS Gerald Ford's return was not routine. It has now broken the longest carrier deployment record since Vietnam, 300 days at sea. Every single call on the record, every single one confirmed. Wednesday is 48 hours away, and this is the video where everything converges. What you are about to hear is not a prediction. It is a structured analysis of 7 confirmed facts, 7 pressure points that are all reaching their maximum stress simultaneously on the same day, and what the range of outcomes for Wednesday actually looks like when you see them together as a system rather than as separate news stories. Once you understand the full architecture of what is about to happen, you cannot unsee it. Let me build this from the confirmed facts in sequence, because the sequence is the story. Fact 1. The ceasefire expires, Wednesday, April 22nd. It was brokered by Pakistan on April 8th and set to last 2 weeks. Since it took effect, both sides have accused each other of violating it. Iran closed the Strait twice. American gunboats fired on and seized the Iranian cargo vessel Tuska. IRGC, fast attack boats, fired on merchant vessels, including French and British-flagged ships, with no radio warning. The ceasefire has been violated so many times by both sides that describing it as a ceasefire at all requires significant charity. Fact 2. The Islamabad talks failed. 21 hours of the highest-level direct engagement between Washington and Tehran since the 1979 revolution, and they produced nothing. No memorandum of understanding, no initialed framework, no agreed text. Vance said Iran chose not to accept American terms. Iran's foreign minister said the talks collapsed because of maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade. Iran's first vice president called American negotiating behavior childish. The gap between a 20-year uranium enrichment suspension and a 5-year suspension, the two positions that emerged from Islamabad, is not a negotiating gap. It is a civilizational disagreement about the meaning of sovereignty. Fact 3. Iran officially rejected the second round. Iran's state news agency, IRNA, confirmed formally that Tehran will not participate in a new round of talks under current conditions. The cited reasons were Washington's excessive demands, unrealistic expectations, constant shifts in stance, repeated contradictions, and the ongoing naval blockade, which Iran considers a ceasefire breach. Vance's team had travel preparations for Pakistan suspended. The hotels in Islamabad that had been cleared for the delegations stood empty. Fact 4. Iran rearmed during the pause. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander appeared on Iranian state television inspecting an underground missile facility, drone warehouses, missile launchers, mobile systems. His statement was explicit. The speed of replenishment during the ceasefire was greater than before the war began. If hostilities resume on Wednesday, America is not striking the degraded force it stopped striking 2 weeks ago. Iran retains approximately 40% of its pre-war long-range drone arsenal and 60% of its ballistic and cruise missile launcher capacity. And both numbers have been climbing throughout the ceasefire period. Fact 5. 3 American carrier strike groups are converging simultaneously. The USS Gerald Ford, over 300 days at sea, breaking the longest deployment record since Vietnam. is back in the Red Sea after repairs. The U.S. Abraham Lincoln is in the Arabian Sea. The USS George H.W. Bush is rounding the Cape of Good Hope with 6,000 additional personnel embarked. 10,000 total additional American troops are converging on the Middle East theater. American forces have completed their preparations and are ready for any scenario, according to a U.S. official. That is not a diplomatic statement. That is a military readiness declaration. Fact 6. Trump threatened total infrastructure destruction. The exact quote from his Truth Social post. My representatives are going to Islamabad, Pakistan for negotiations. We're offering a very fair and reasonable deal, and I hope they take it because, if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. Legal experts have noted that deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure constitutes a war crime under international law. When asked by a reporter if he was concerned about this, Trump said, and I am quoting directly, "No, I hope I don't have to do it." Fact 7. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed and physically dangerous. The IEA has formally designated the 2026 Hormuz crisis as the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Global oil supply dropped 10.1 million barrels per day in March. 400 million barrels of emergency reserves have been deployed. Europe has approximately 6 weeks of jet fuel remaining. Kuwait Petroleum estimates 4 months to restore full Gulf production. And American gas prices reached a national average of $4.05 per gallon on Sunday, with the Energy Secretary stating they may not return below $3 until next year. 7 facts, 7 pressure points, all reaching maximum stress simultaneously on Wednesday. Now, let me show you what the structural gap actually is, because understanding the precise distance between these two positions is the only way to accurately assess what Wednesday means. The American position, stripped to its core, Iran must permanently end all uranium enrichment, dismantle its major enrichment facilities, surrender its entire stockpile of highly enriched uranium, approximately 440 kilograms now entombed underground after the B-2 strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. End all funding for allied militant groups across the region, and accept a fully open Strait of Hormuz with no Iranian toll charges. In exchange, America will lift sanctions and normalize relations. The Iranian position stripped to its core. Iran has the sovereign right to enrich uranium for peaceful civilian purposes. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. It sits in Iranian territorial waters and has the right to regulate and charge for passage. Iran demands the lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions, the release of frozen assets including $6 billion in previously frozen funds, security guarantees preventing future American and Israeli attacks, war reparations for the destruction of its nuclear facilities and civilian infrastructure, and an end to Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Here is the precise detail that the Islamabad talks revealed about how far apart these positions actually are. American negotiators proposed a 20-year suspension of uranium enrichment. Iran countered with 5 years. America rejected 5 years. America also reportedly proposed that Iran not be allowed to enrich uranium even for civilian purposes, a demand that would require Iran to surrender what its constitution, its military, and its population define as a fundamental sovereign right. Iran's foreign minister said they came within inches of an understanding before encountering what he called maximalism. A senior American official characterized the Iranian position as not yet having moved far enough. 20 years versus 5 years. Complete prohibition versus sovereign enrichment rights. These are not positions that close in 48 hours. They barely closed in 21 hours of the most intensive direct negotiations between these two countries since before most of the negotiators were born. I want to give Trump the full credit his position deserves, because intellectual honesty demands it. The coercive pressure campaign is real, and it is working in ways the public narrative is not fully capturing. American crude oil exports have surged to a record 4.9 million barrels per day in April 2026. American energy producers are the swing supplier filling the gap created by the Hormuz closure. Every barrel of Gulf oil that cannot reach Asia is being replaced by American Gulf Coast crude. That is not just economic benefit, it is structural leverage. America can sustain the Hormuz crisis economically in ways that Iran, with collapsing oil revenues, a free-fall rial, and 40% pre-war inflation, fundamentally cannot. The Tauska seizure sent a message that no diplomatic communique could match. An Iranian-flagged vessel, nearly 900 feet long, almost as heavy as an aircraft carrier, was stopped dead in international waters by the USS Spruance, a hole blown in its engine room. U.S. Marines on its deck right now seeing what is on board. That is not a blockade. That is enforcement. That is a message to every Iranian official that the cost of non-compliance is not abstract. And Trump's threat to destroy every power plant and bridge in Iran, as alarming as the language is not empty. The United States has already demonstrated it can penetrate Iran's most hardened facilities with B-2 bombers carrying massive ordnance penetrators. It killed Iran's supreme leader on the opening night of the campaign. It degraded approximately 60% of Iran's missile launch capacity in 6 weeks of strikes. The threat is credible, and Iran's negotiators know it. The question is not whether America has leverage. It does. The question is whether that leverage is sufficient to close a gap that has defined American-Iranian relations for 47 years, in 48 hours. Here are the 3 scenarios for Wednesday in their precise form, not simplified, not dramatized, exactly as the structural analysis produces them. Scenario 1. Ceasefire extension, the most likely single outcome based on current diplomatic signals. Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Oman, and Qatar are all working simultaneously to broker an extension. Turkey's foreign minister said he is optimistic. Pakistan's army chief has been in Tehran carrying new messages from Washington. The AP reported an in-principle agreement to extend, though a U.S. official immediately clarified America has not formally agreed. An extension of 2 to 4 weeks keeps the diplomatic track alive, prevents immediate resumption of strikes, and gives both sides time to find the face-saving formula that neither can currently construct in public. The fundamental gap remains unresolved. A new deadline is created. The pressure cycle repeats. Scenario 2. Partial framework announced. Both sides accept language that neither publicly calls a deal, but that provides enough structure to declare progress. Iran accepts a nuclear constraint framed as a voluntary suspension with verification. Not permanent, not a complete prohibition, but structured and monitored. America accepts a partial blockade reduction tied to Iranian compliance steps. The Strait reopens under a formula that gives Iran nominal sovereignty language. Both Trump and Iran's negotiators can claim something to their domestic audiences. The hard questions, permanent enrichment prohibition, sovereignty of the Strait, war reparations, sanctions architecture, are deferred to a future negotiating track. This is less likely than Scenario 1, but more likely than it appears from the public signals. Scenario 3. Ceasefire expires. Strikes resume. The least likely, but most consequential outcome. Trump's threat to knock out every power plant and bridge is executed. Iran responds with its restocked arsenal, drones and missiles manufactured during the ceasefire, some produced this month, according to the IRGC commander's own statement. Gulf air defenses, already significantly depleted from the first phase of this conflict, face a fresh Iranian strike package. The IEA's largest disruption in history enters its most severe phase. Brent crude moves toward $150. The global economy absorbs a supply shock with no historical precedent. And the 3 American carrier strike groups converging on the region begin generating the sustained strike sorties that 300 days of deployment on the USS Gerald Ford was building toward. The base rate favors Scenario 1. But Scenario 3 is not off the table. And the difference between Scenarios 1 and 3 is whether Iran sends a delegation to Islamabad before Wednesday midnight, or does not. Here is the historical weight that nobody is placing on this moment. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasted 13 days. 13 days during which the world genuinely faced the prospect of nuclear war, and resolved through a back-channel deal in which Kennedy secretly agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey in exchange for Soviet withdrawal from Cuba. A deal that was not publicly acknowledged for decades. A deal that required both sides to accept a private outcome that neither could describe publicly as what it actually was. What is unfolding right now in the back channels between Washington, Tehran, Islamabad, Ankara, Riyadh, and Beijing has the same structural requirement. Both sides need an outcome they can describe to their domestic audiences in ways that do not match what actually happened. Trump needs to call it unconditional Iranian surrender. Iran's government needs to call it a principled defense of sovereignty. The deal that closes this crisis, if one exists, will be built in the space between those two incompatible public narratives, in exactly the way that Kennedy and Khrushchev built their deal in the space between "we won" and "we backed down." Whether the diplomats in the back channels between now and Wednesday can construct that space in 48 hours is the only question that matters right now. History does not announce itself when the resolution happens. It announces itself when we look back and understand what was actually agreed, and what was never publicly said. Wednesday is 48 hours away. We will be here when the answer comes.